Bene, buonasera a tutti.
Good evening to you all, and welcome to this meeting entitled Why the 68 Questions from History. Thank you very much to our distinguished guests. To my right, you can see Professor Maria Bocci, full professor of contemporary history at the Catholic University in Milan. And Mario Calabresi, editor-in-chief of a newspaper, La Repubblica. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you. Warm thanks for being here with us. Let's see today's topic. Now, at the beginning, we're going to ask Professor Bocci to help us understand the historical contents of the exhibitions that was visited by so many of you, entitled We Won Everything 1968 to 2018. Then she will tell us how this exhibition was organized. She was working with a group of young researchers and university students. Then we'll be asking Mr. Calabresi to answer a few questions asked by those organizing the exhibitions. These questions are connected to history and are also related to our present. So I will immediately give the floor to Professor Bocci.
Grazie. Grazie, buonasera.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you all. Thank you, because you're here with us tonight. I love the meeting, and I know what it means. And you came here in order to think with us about a short bit of history, Italian history, which cannot be taken for granted. Why so? Why are we going to talk about 1968? Why the 68? Why this title? And why talking about this at the meeting here in Rimini? With Francesco Magni, Marta Busagni, and the other people working for the exhibition, we started last year to organize the exhibition, and I said immediately that it could not be taken for granted, and it's not easy to talk about this topic at the meeting in Rimini. Not because this is the anniversary of 1968. I study history, and I can tell you that anniversaries are typically nightmare. Anniversaries sometimes can be important, but why are we talking about the 68? I'm going to start from this question. This is why this is the title of this session. Let's start off with a statement. As I'm a professor of history, every day I meet many students and young people, and thank God I often meet the many young people who've been working with us to prepare this exhibition. And there's something which I soon realized. 1968 is still a myth, a powerful myth. A provoking myth, which has its own charm. For us, adults, We all lived through the 1968s, like my generation that was in high school in the early 70s, in the late 70s, early 80s, and we have a sort of idea of 1968. And many people have lived the 1968s as a very meaningful experience in their lives. But it's a myth for our students, for our youth, which is quite striking because it is not easy for the youth to be fascinated and charmed by a historical myth. It's even a myth for the youth who don't know anything about 1968. Many students who've been working with us to prepare the exhibition didn't know anything about it, but they were fascinated, charmed by it, like a seductive era. Many of you have visited the exhibition, and maybe you've realized that this exhibition is not really focusing only on 1968, but it's on something else. We want everything. And this title comes by no chance. We want everything, to me, is an exhibition based on the attempt to go beyond the myth of 1968 in order to come to terms with the historical events. The first aim of the exhibition, which is very close to the aim I have at university, is to explain 1968 to the eyes of the youth who find it charming. Why is it not just history for the youth? It's not like study Lenin, Mussolini, the Cold War, the World Wars. To my generation, for us who were young in the 20th century, the major history of the early 20th century is still very charming, fascinating. To my students, this is not the case. To them, Lenin and Mussolini are as far as Napoleon, for example. But this is not the case for 1968. 1968 as a sort of aura. They identify themselves with 1968, especially those studying at university. Why is it so? And there are reasons which are somewhat different from the reasons why it was so charming for my generation. If you also think about what happened after the 1968, after 1968, as in the 1970s, what was 1968 for us? Even if we haven't lived through it, but we've got it in our DNA. We grew up with 1968. It was a symbol of people against the authority, removal of all fathers, self-determination, extreme politicization, and therefore fights between opposed forces, clashes, clashes with the police, cities invaded by people, rallies, mutual intolerance, up to urban guerrilla, which the elderly can still remember. But this is not what is charming the youth, at least not at the beginning. You have to tell them what happened. And Aldo Brandirali this morning talked about one of the major problems of 1968, consumerism. Our youth no longer realize that they are living in a consumerist society. So there's one word which is key to understand the 1968: change. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but what is good in this exhibition is that it can lead to a dialogue, an exchange. And thanks to you coming to exhibition, we can find out things that we couldn't even imagine. But change is the key word for the exhibition. This word can well summarize the provocative force of 1968 for the youth. Maybe I wouldn't have accepted the invitation by Francesco Magni and Marta Busagni had I not perceived that there was an interest in that by the youth. Dealing with 1968 from a historical perspective means providing tools to understand and to have an exchange on that myth, which is charming. I'm convinced that myths are no good. So history is helping us in that. And above all, 1968 was full of turning points, changes, argumentations, and also clashes even between us, the organizers of the exhibitions. So we needed to understand what others thought about it, to understand what was really useful to show at the meeting in Rimini. So over this year, I took on this challenge because I saw that 1968 can make an in-depth analysis, which is related to man's existence. And this is what Aldo Brandirali said this morning. This is a major issue for our youth today. Change means many things for the youth. It has different meanings. It's made up of different layers. Every night, when when I finish working, there's somebody among our guides, and they're really very, very good because at their age, I would have never dared explaining 1968 to people who maybe lived through that period of time. They're never happy. They always ask me something. We always debate on 1968 with them, with our guides. And therefore, they have expectations, they have desires, they have claims sometimes, they feel personally involved. And this is related to many things, universities, or organizations. Banderali this morning said, what does studying mean today? The youth are wondering about it, are asking themselves these questions. A relation with professors, working in students' organizations. And there are many more things coming up. The national problems, collective dramas, individual dramas. There's another key word, the world. The change in the world, starting from ourselves, from our universities, and from what surrounds us. The world is a dimension which is a typical idea related to 1968 and related to change. Even for the students who've been working with us today. When some of them started studying what happened 50 years ago, they were interpreting them as if those events were occurring today. We had to work to make them understand that time went by and there can be no overlap between these two periods of time, 1968 and 2018. taking on the challenge, working with the youth, having an exchange among us curators was a precious opportunity for us, which has changed our academic year. And it was an excellent reason to work on this exhibition and organize it. So I was talking about the word change. It's a word that makes us connected to 1968. Now, I gave you the context. The youth want many different changes. As soon as we start studying and we start thinking, there's a whole set of questions that come up. What's the meaning of change? Where should we go? Where should we head to? How should we do that? Who's leading us? What should change? What are the tools for change? And then there's another major question, but who is able to change? It's a terrible question that goes down deep. These questions are very important, but very burdensome. There are questions spurring from 1968, but characterizing our time too, which is so harsh, as we all know. Then we've also got other problems. 1968 is also related to other problems and other words, because the need for change, which was wanted and desired by the generation at that time, and this is yet another element that is being considered by our students. The change, I was saying, was global. The youth in the 1960s were an independent social category that was totally different from adults for lifestyles, taste, cultural taste in the Western world, and not only. The youth in the 1960s, and you're going to see that in the exhibition, has become global, despite the very significant differences between a young person living in Prague or Warsaw and a young person living in Milan or Paris or in Japan. But the youth have started to exist from that time onwards. It is the first generation in history that wanted to become a protagonist of change. Today's youth wonder about that. One of our girls the other day was asking a question to Franco Bonisoli in a very moving session. Why do the youth at that time could sleep with no problems without thinking about a war that was taking place elsewhere in the world? Because this is no longer the case today. Now, this girl was asking a question to that incredible opening of the youth at that time. For them, 1968 was an era where today's little words can just result suffocating. So from 1968 asks a whole set of questions that today's youth have to answer. Who can be the credible interlocutors? And this is yet another major problem of 1968. What are the interlocutors of our youth? In the meeting with Bonisoli the other day, I was really struck because he said that a young boy between 13 and 19 years of age, how this boy decides to become a terrorist. How so? Because this guy is very young. And that raises doubts in me. I'm an educator, I'm an adult. I am a person who is working with the youth on every single day. So who are the credible interlocutors. This was the recurrent question in 1968. There were very few interlocutors at that time. Be they credible or not, they were all ignored and neglected. So it's problematic. So the directions that were identified by 1968, like Marxism, the Frankfurt School, the concept related to the third world, and you're going to see that in the exhibition, are no longer present, are no longer important for today's youth. So what is the future ahead? It's an urgent question. There's no benchmark. There's no point of reference. There's not even the theoretical elements in order to understand the theory. At that time, it was not easy to explain what Marxism or the School of Frankfurt was at that time. So it's a delicate question. Now, I'm thinking about my students at the Catholic University. When the youth speak, we often feel that they don't know what the future lies in store for them. There's a vacuum. They have no benchmarks. So there are significant differences between 1968 and today. But the refusal of the past in 1968 and those who were conveying values led to a vacuum and has led to the emptiness of today. There are many other aspects that were fascinating for our youth. And I'll just tell you some of them. Someone has told us that we are obsessed with that because 1968 has only been seen in that light. Maybe it's true. I'm referring to authenticity, the desire for authenticity. The youth in the 1960s, in the 1960s, expressed that under many different forms. Because authenticity is what most struck our youth. This desire for authenticity is something that our youth identify themselves with. So this was for us a way to interpret 1968. Actually, when we start working on the exhibition, I personally made a rather different choice. Over 1 year, many things happened. It was like we had two different ideas. The curators had a different idea. We wanted to study what Pope Francis called the epochal change. We were convinced that 1968 maybe is not at its root, but it's a sort of accelerator for the epochal change. We wanted to focus on the consequences of 1968, the anthropological change. But students had another idea. So the exhibition is the result of a mutual exchange of ideas. And I believe that one of the most beautiful results is that by having this debate, by having this exchange, even among curators, there has been mutual enrichment because other people can always show you a different way to look at things. And we were really ready to have an open exchange among us. As Don Milani used to say, in one where he was quoted in one of the 1968 manifestos, we focused on what the young people were most interested in. But we know that the interest of the youth must be checked, verified. Maybe you can find out, discover different histories, different interests, and an exhibition can show what is most interesting, most useful. So the quest for knowledge, helped by professors and teachers, is useful. And I'm going to say this by using the words of a girl who helped us a lot. Her name is Margherita. At the end of our work, she wrote, and I quote, "History is crazy because it helps us understand, but I would really lie if I said that now I have understood. I have many more questions than before, not only the questions on that time, but also questions on today. The exhibition is based on the desire to better understand today, but it would be wrong to look for an answer in the past. However, a dialogue between past and present is inevitable simply because by reading the essays I read and watching the videos I have watched, looking at youth who felt oppressed by society, I wonder, is this true today for me? Is that the case today for me? Why so? What is oppressing me? What is freeing me? What frees people, the youth? It is a very difficult challenge, which is not easy to tackle. So, the exhibition is based on two parallel ideas. Clearly, it does have to provide information on 1968, and it also tries to explain who we are and what we want. There's a video in the exhibition showing interesting ideas. Maybe you've seen that our assumption is that 1968 started with the economic boom and lasted a long time because protagonists in 1968 were the youth who, for the first time, lived in a world where wealth was rising. The revolution was not made by the youth who lived in poverty, just like their parents. They were born usually after the Second World War. They had access to education, to different ways to know the world, unlike their parents. So the protest was not based on poverty, didn't come out of poverty. Certainly not for the youth belonging to the middle class who went to university, and together with worker students were the protagonists of 1968. So why was there a rebellion among the youth? Probably because of the promise of the welfare society, because desires had to be fulfilled. Happiness can almost be bought. Consumerism gives us hope, gave hope that happiness could be grasped, that all the products that could be purchased were the way to be successful in life and to have good human relations. In this context, the protests started, especially among the youth in the middle class, showing social uneasiness and questioning the promises made by adults. 1968 and the protests in the 1960s question a set of values where the well-being was the ultimate purpose and wealth was the ultimate purpose. reading Marcuse, the youth said that 1968 uses false promise to belittle desires, consuming desires, so that they wanted to get free from what the adults believed in. So we gave ample room to the protests of the youth in 1968. Our students identify themselves with Mario Savio, the students of the American universities that started to revolt between 1962 and 1964, and asking very important questions such as what is really important? Is it possible to live in a better and different world? If we want to change society, how could we do that? And then here there's the collapse of the American myth, the crisis of the Catholic world, of the Catholic youth in the Western world, which significantly fed the youth protests in 1968. And then there are different issues related to the problems of the world: Vietnam, the US in Latin America, racism, neocolonialism, the tanks of the Warsaw Pact, the persecutions beyond the Iron Curtain. At some point, there's the art, the core of the exhibition is in the crisis of tradition, the one embodied by religious beliefs and Catholic education, and the old interpretation of Marxism. And then in the exhibition, in the 5 sections of the exhibition, you will see the crisis of school, of the university system, the fact that the students used to tell their professors, their teachers, that they wanted to teach something they were not interested in. And then all the problems connected to the mass university, the crisis of students' organizations. And then there's a focus on 1968, including the Eastern one. Thank you very much to Cristiana for curating this part of the exhibition. Hence, the basic democracy, counterculture, Mao, the Cultural Revolution, and so on and so forth. You will also see the radicalization of conflict and the consequences of 1968 as in the sex revolution, which was a turning point from the middle class morale. Those of you who visited the exhibition know that in the end you can see the victory of individualism, subjectivism, which sometimes lead our youth to look for people who can calm their anger and fear. But we are somewhat provocative in the exhibition. Margherita wrote, and I quote, "After meeting a witness, a person who lived in 1968, I often wonder the meaning of changing the world. How can you change the world? I was mesmerized when I heard a witness, and I thought that the changing the world and losing oneself does not mean changing the world, but means wasting time." So you see that here you have a series of dialogue, exchange of opinion. Hence, the youth wanted to find freedom. And this is connected to what is happening today. So there are still pending questions which are related to our happiness, because we want to be happy, and to find possible ways for us all to better live and to share a common destiny. These questions are still pending. This is why we wanted not just to show what we understood about 1968. Many things are missing from that exhibition, but our exhibition is a sort of introduction, food for thought, in order to meet people, and we have one of them with us today who have something very interesting to say on these topics. Topics which are still challenging today. We know that what we have studied is not enough to answer these questions, and simple answers are not enough. But maybe people in 1968 wanted everything immediately, and with that they made a wrong move, a wrong step. They took a wrong step. As you can see in our everyday life, it is necessary to work. Maybe it will take all our life. We all feel involved. We are working. And that's why we want to meet all of you and all the people who are working just like us. Thank you very much.
La professoressa Bocci.
Professor Bocci ended her speech by referring to some questions of youngsters of today and of the past. So my first question to Mr. Calabresi is the following. What does it mean for you, also on the basis of your own personal and professional experience, to contribute to the change of the world? How can we really build the society we live in? What's the contribution we can make as people eager to change things? And what would you tell young people who do not feel this need, that remain closed in their small and isolated worlds? Well, after such a range of questions, I can do nothing but, raise my hands, say goodbye, and go away. Well, jokes apart, I'm very happy to be here. And if I had been asked to come here to talk about the celebrations for 68, I would never come because, as Professor Bocci also said, we have enough of celebrating the anniversary of 68. Instead, the fact of talking with young people about the challenges of that time and of today is much more challenging and interesting. And while I was on my way here, I thought about Sergio Marchionne. I was director of La Stampa, and at that time, La Stampa was still owned by a Fiat manufacturing company. And I remember that Marchionne came here, and 1 week after that, I remember I talked to him, and he had so been fascinated by the meeting. He was full by enthusiasm and excitement. He told me, everybody says that in Italy young people are somehow weak and with no excitement. Instead, at the meeting, I found a crowd of excited young people, and I really hope that they will invite me again. And knowing how it was hard to convince him to leave his office, I was struck and surprised and said, here today, I thought about him and what he told me about the great excitement he felt. And today, while I was on the train, I called on the phone Mirella, sister of my mother. She has been a physician all through her life. Today she is retired. And she joined the beginning of the 68 movement. Actually, everything began in 67 with an occupation one night of the Statale di Milano University. I remember that she told me that she was there. And I asked her, I mean, what was your driver? What was your motivation about? And she told me, well, inequalities, especially within the university, in terms of right to study, because today we take that for granted, but in the 60s, still, I mean, that right was not so common and so self-evident. Only wealthy people could afford paying for their children's education at university. And also, I mean, we wanted to question ourselves about education and training and university. So this woman joined this first round of occupation, and then she also told me, my father, so my grandfather, well, yes, you can join the occupation, but you have to come home at night. Well, actually, she stayed there in the evening, but then she got back home with the trolleyway. And many people today say that 68 left some heritage, because somehow, regardless of what people think, today's society has fewer inequalities than in the 60s. So you ask me, what can we do to change the world? Well, I think that today, what I can tell to people like you, young people, is that we all have to try to make a difference through our life every day. Because every day we're faced with opportunities to show who we are, to express ourselves. So that's exactly the point. What did my aunt do? Well, my aunt sort of lived her life. She has not become famous for nothing. I mean, and she lives in Brembana Valley, in the upper part, and her fiancé of that time joined the clashes and the squares, but then they left because they were sort of a bit afraid. They did not like what was happening, and they decided that they could make a difference by opening up a hospital in Africa. And I wrote this also in a book I wrote. So 2 young people who got married in 69, my aunt, her husband, and they decided to ask their friends and relatives to give them as a present for the wedding everything they needed to open up an hospital in Uganda in the Karamoja area. And well, actually, the hospital was made of one room. There was a savanna and one room building. And they sort of decided to create a place to make people get born. And so they asked their friends and relatives as wedding presents all the things they needed to do that. So gases, drugs, disinfectants. And so they decided that they wanted to make a difference through that. So after graduating, both as physicians, they went to Uganda and opened up this sort of maternity ward. It was just in one room in the desert, and they did it with a lot of passion and excitement. 4 years ago, 45 years after, I went there to see the consequences of a wedding gift list. I remember I had to sort of step over in Ethiopia, and I asked my mother what she still had of her wedding list. And she told me, after looking into the living room. Well, I have still some coffee cups, some saucers, some plates, and that's it. All the rest has been broken down by you, children, when playing. And what is left of my aunt and uncle choice? And what has been left about their choice to make a difference differently? So there is today a hospital delivering 10,000 babies a year. One of the largest hospitals in Uganda stemmed from a wedding list. When I was there, I was so moved and deeply touched to see to what extent the dream of two newlyweds sort of was able then to sort of keep going thanks to other people's contribution. So I would like now to say something maybe not so good, because they did exactly what many people say today. So they tried to go and help deprived and disadvantaged people in their countries of origin. And this is exactly what many people say today. So we need to help them in their countries of origin. Okay, it's good to say it, but then you have to do something about it, and then so you have to make words be followed by actions and say, what does it mean today to make the difference? I'll try to give an answer to that. First of all, I think that it is important to sort of get away from the society made of and social media. I have two young daughters, and they told me, oh, that roommate of mine is the most popular of the school, of the class. And I say, who cares? I couldn't care less. And they tell me, oh, you can't understand. And I say, no, I also was 11 years old once in my life. So this idea that everything can be somehow judged or fixed by putting something on Facebook. And they told me, oh, Facebook, it's so old. It's something grandparents use. Okay, let's say that you put a photo on Instagram and you wait for the likes, how many likes you get. So this idea of somehow entrusting the others the power to constantly judge what you do and what you are. So please, please, if you can, try to escape that. Try to make your own thoughts and ideas about yourselves. So look into a mirror, not to take a selfie, but just to ask yourselves, what do you want to do in life? What does interest you in life? Secondly, let's talk about the worth of words. What's the value of words? I think that we live in a society that has totally lost the value of words. Let's make a test. Everything seems to somehow be floating. Normal words, ordinary words seem to have disappeared. Everything is made to the extreme. If you see an accident, a road accident, immediately you see a super witness. Everything is sort of made extreme, is exaggerated. So there is a super witness of a car accident, or a super this, a super that. Our politicians on Twitter use this tone, and even the president of the US. Either you sort of exaggerate to make yourself heard, otherwise nobody sort of listens to you. Think about something you want to say and you want to be heard. You think for a second. Let's try to avoid using all this super, and maybe instead try not to use that, and try instead to use suitable ordinary words. I think that it's much more impressive and effective, because people may notice that. Well, I have now examples in my head that are plenty of bad words, so I cannot told them. But let's imagine, oh, my mother told me that tonight I can't go out. I'm so angry. I can't go out tonight. And I'm deeply sorry for that. And everybody's going to say, what are you saying? What the hell are you saying? Well, so maybe there are more children here than parents. So instead of yelling to your parents, no, you can't go out tonight. Okay, mommy, this lack of trust is sort of blessing me deeply. I think that your parents will be so surprised because I think they are ready to a challenge constantly with you. But if you sort of make a sort of understatement, they will be very surprised. I constantly make tests like this one. Every day I receive an incredible number of mails or tweets and also many offenses, anything. Because people today seem to need to offend anybody any day. So if you are the director of a newspaper, it's quite sort of normal. So the other day, I found an email writing to me. You have to feel so ashamed. I thought you were a respectable person. I read your books, and then I saw that the website of your newspaper, instead of talking about the Genoa tragedy, well, the website was all about the football matches of the championship. Oh, I will never, ever read again your newspaper. I'm deeply disappointed, and you have to feel ashamed. Oh, my gosh. And I thought, well, did we open... well, our newsreel with the Lazio football team? I don't know. I think nobody ever chose to open our website, a newsreel with that. So, well, what would you instinctively answer? Oh, come on. Sort of leave me in peace and go to hell. So I tried to be good, a good boy. And I try to be as kind as I can. And I answered, I thank you for telling me that you wrote my books. I'm very much surprised by what you tell me because we sort of had a huge coverage of the Genoa tragedy and the Cheddar effects because everything was so tragic and so incredibly horrible. I'm sorry, I can't really figure out what you're telling me. But, I mean, it was not intention. 10 minutes after that, I'm so sorry. This morning, I had a very bad start in the day. Actually, I appreciate you very much. I will keep reading your newspaper. You see, every time that somebody attacks you and you react instead in a kind way, because everybody is so angry today because as soon as two people have a little sort of car bumping, they just get off of their cars like ready for apocalypse. But if one of the two says, I'm so sorry, maybe you had an appointment, can we agree quickly so that we do not lose too much time? The other one sort of maybe got off the car looking like a sort of a superhero ready for the last fight and reacts unexpectedly and says, oh my gosh. So he's surprised. So trying to get everything down of a notch is the big challenge of today. And you could react, oh, it's just a matter of methodology. No, it's also a matter of content because this tells us and shows us that we can't always sort of live like that so aggressively. And we can't live life as it was a sort of a short run. The life is a marathon, is a long distance run. So it's not a matter of a few seconds. It's a matter of years. It's a matter of long deadlines, you also have the sense and develop the sense of conquest. Well, in the exhibition, there's also mention about consumerism, and consumerism started in the 50s and 60s, but consumerism at that time was different from today's consumerism, because at that time, in order to fulfill a wish, you needed then some time, some work. If you wanted to buy a washing machine, you took some time to get the money, and you got the product after some time. I remember my grandma who wanted a washing machine, and she decided to sell her car, her Cinquecento, to buy a washing machine. So for some time she had to think, which one should I choose? She had 7 children, and she opted for the washing machine. And well, she was wealthy, but she had to make a choice between the car and the washing machine. But then, in recent times, especially before the economic crisis and the economic crunch, are based on the idea of fulfilling immediately a wish. But when a wish is fulfilled immediately, well, it loses its sort of pleasure. And I see it with my 2 daughters. When they ask me for something and they get it immediately, well, they lose interest very, very soon. Instead, when we ask them to, I don't know, do something, maybe study more at school, and they conquer that, well, they feel it differently. So it's the destination, the journey becomes the destination. So set a destination, set goals to be reached. And I go back to the idea of being authentic, the idea of authenticity, because you need to sort of to get things through labor, through time. Because if you run 100 meters, well, you're breathless. But to run the long distance marathon, you need to be sort of patient. You need to develop endurance and resilience and so on. And the very last thing is this one. Our grandparents had to struggle a lot. The country that was reconstructed after the Second World War was reconstructed with a lot of hard work. And then people thought that progress was about protecting one's own children from labor and hard work. So let's try to make life easier for them. I think that was a gigantic sort of failure. And what is the best piece of advice that you can give? Well, it was a big swindle, because labor and fatigue and hard work are the best thing that you can wish yourself, because that means a sort of getting things in a sort of very, very difficult way. So if you study in the morning from 5 years in the morning until 7 o'clock in the morning, well, it's hard, but then you conquer things with such a satisfaction. You win things, you get them with labor and hard work. Well, parents should give their children tools to do things with labor and hard work. So true things never come from free. The best things never come from free. Questioning yourselves is tiresome. It's hard. Well, putting a like on a picture is much easier. Questioning yourselves also in a sort of suffered way. It's hard. It's hard work too. So again, this is an antidote also to today's society, because I do strongly believe even though now I'm in a minority, that the best answer to young people today is not, okay, you don't find a job, we will give you some state allowances because you don't find money. No, we need to give you tools to build your own life. You need to build your own life with effort, but you need the tools. We have to provide you the tools. Otherwise, what kind of life is that? With no effort, no labor, no fatigue, no exhaustion. You need to put yourself to a challenge and to the test. Failure is also very important. And sort of we need to get out of this catch-22, this sort of delusion that either you're successful, either you're nothing, or you're nothing. So if you fail, it's not a problem. So if you do 10 things and if 6 things go well and 4 go wrong, it's okay. But then, I mean, try to put yourself at stake. Try. I will make an example that maybe is not sort of very, intellectual. But I think about Michael Jordan, a great basketball player, probably my favorite one. And I washed cars at the Milan fair to buy the Michael Jordan Nikes. And wow, what an effort, what an exhaustion. I had to work hard to buy them. I still have them. I remember how many cars I had to wash to buy them. So to me, those shoes are very precious. So, and once Michael Jordan was asked how it was possible for him to become so good. And he said, because I made so many mistakes. And how is it so? Because every time I did some training, I tried to remember all the mistakes I was making. And when everybody was leaving, I used to stay another 30 minutes to work on my mistakes. But we sort of finished our training at 8, and then the gym used to close down. I went to the guard and asked him if he could leave me in until 8:30, and he said, no, I have to go home. But he had a sort of a weakness. He had a sweet tooth, and my mother was so good at making cakes. And so I said, so I give you 2 cakes made by my mother per week, and you leave me 30 minutes more. He loved my mother's cake so much that he let me stay another 30 minutes. And I learned so much by correcting my mistakes in those 30 minutes. And I made so many mistakes that I had to correct so much. That's why I was able to make it. So don't be afraid of trying, and don't be afraid of making mistakes, and don't be afraid of feel exhausted and make effort.
Thank you very much to our guests for today's session. After what we have heard, I think we can better understand what Pope Francis called us to do at the meeting of this year. He called us upon not giving up and making the world a better place. So this is what our 2 distinguished guests have told us today in this session. Thank you very much once again. And I remind you all that you all have the opportunity to contribute to the organization of a meeting like this one. So I invite all of you to give their contribution to our dedicated spaces, Dona Ora, Donate Now, in order to continue making our history come true. Thank you.